So that was a wonderful introduction. I don't usually blush, so that's why I didn't blush, but inside I like So we want to take you today into a journey, into the age, what we call the age of the experience. So this really fits into what Brian was saying. Customer experience is a bit like teenage sex. Yeah? So everybody wants to do it. Nobody really knows. Hello. Spontaneous. Nobody really knows how to do it, but everybody pretends they actually already do it. Yeah? So that's the kind of where we are. And that's a bit the cool kid on the block customer experience right now. It's the hype, the big vibe. As Brian mentioned earlier, Kantar has been really building up an expertise since decades in the customer experience space already, with about over 800 experts around the world in 80 countries. So while the cool kid on the block sounds really exciting, we like to think that we have a different base of expertise when it comes to customer experience. I'm going to fall off the chair now. So we are today in a society that has gone through a big shift. Being a society, and you might remember the 80s, the 90s, the movies like Wall Street, really focusing on accumulating possessions, money, making money. So from accumulating and possessing to shifting to a society that really embraces living the moment, enjoying the memories, and really focusing on accessing rather than accumulating, renting rather than possessing. And that's a massive shift in terms of mindset for the consumers. And that's where we're positioned right now. And actually, this is especially true for some segments of the population. So when we think about the millennials, 75% say that they prefer to spend their money on experience than on possessing. I like this phrase because for many of millennials, that means they prefer to spend their parents' money on experience than on material possession. I'm thinking about my kids and I'm thinking, yeah, it's good that you don't spend your money. But we talk a lot about millennials. We like to stereotype people. And actually, in today's society, you can't put people into little boxes anymore. I don't want to go into details into these numbers, but these numbers show that our beliefs don't align with stereotypes anymore in terms of using companies that offer online services. The difference between very young people and baby boomers are not that significant. And the same when it comes to offline usage and offline customer service. So let's start thinking we've gone through a shift of mindset in our society, and let's get away from stereotyping people, whether that's gender or age, which are the easiest one. So we're in the context now, but the thing about experience and living in an experience age is that it has become a business priority. And there are financial advantages of really getting this experience advantage right. Within 5 years, so from 2017 to 2022, which is in 2 years, it is estimated that the industry of customer experience will have triplicated from about 6 billion to about 17 billion. 17 billion is a massive amount of money that is lying on the table. And why does that happen? Why do we think it's going to be that way? So I think everybody here knows Brand Z. And we've run an analysis of over, I think, 12 years of global top 100 brands within Brand Z, and have found out that those brands that perform highly in the customer experience space, so those brands that really facilitate this impactful experience to their consumer, they have grown 10 times more than their brand value than other brands. And these are facts. So that's not an estimation. And actually, we also see within Fortune 100 companies that there's a much higher, focus on customer centricity at the board table. Over 20% of Fortune 100 companies have a person sitting in their board, in their C-suite, who represents the customer. We call CCO, Chief Customer Officer, or whatever name we gave them, versus others. So that really gives a message as to client centricity is a leadership responsibility, and it's the responsibility of the board and the leadership of every company to put the resources and the vision out there for the whole company to understand and to follow. So we say that experience has really the potential to make or break relationships, which means it has the potential to make or break a brand or a company, and we've seen that. We don't have to put the examples out there. Because we live in a world today where there is more of everything. There's more noise, there's more choice, there's more voice, there's more competition. We have customers who know exactly what they want, when they want it, and they're going to shout at the top of their head over the rooftops to get it. So making these people your ambassadors is more important than ever. And we tend to think as marketers that, oh, if I don't get it right today, I'm going to get it right tomorrow. But actually, often in many industries, you don't have that many opportunities to get it right with your customers. Think about how often you buy a new car, or how often you're going to ask for a mortgage for a new house, or how often you're going to be staying in a specific hotel. You don't have that many touch points to get it right with the customers. You really need to ensure that you nail it when you have that communication channel open with them. And there are some brands who have built their success exactly on this. They have created a brand and a company that is an ecosystem aligned around the need of the human being and of their customers. And these are just some examples. There are actually some more. And if you look at these names, they basically have three things in common. And that's the typical moment where I can remember two when I forget the third. Okay, so I'm going to try and remember all the three. So first thing is, they have absolutely no silos within their companies. There is not the brand marketing here, campaign marketing there, communications out there, customers. This doesn't exist in these companies. They have one language, one vision, and at the center of it is the customer. And that's dramatically different to how most of the company function today. So the second thing is, they don't sell a product. What they bring is an experience. None of these have launched anything that is dramatically, differently innovative. Starbucks isn't, you don't go to Starbucks for coffee. Nobody goes to Starbucks for coffee. But they sell coffee, right? I mean, their product is coffee, but nobody goes for the coffee. And if you see others, these are platforms, ecosystem. Talk about Amazon, who's now #1 brand in the Brand Z ranking. Netflix. Netflix is the new name, or is the new company for something that has ceased to exist. About 1 or 2 decades ago, that was a movie renting companies. Who remembers? Blockbuster. Remembers Blockbuster? I mean, I remember, but who remembers? At Netflix today, they've won 5 Oscars. They've won 5 Oscars, and they are now accessing over 60 million households there. And it's a series and movie renting platform. This is how the world has changed. So this is really a key element of differentiation for these companies. And this is why most of these companies are incredibly successful. They have a completely different view of how to put the human being at the center of their effort. So I think now you should be brainwashed to think that experience is probably something we should be putting a bit more focus on. But actually, it's not only about experience. As Brian said before, it's about the coherence that you put between what you promise your customer and what you ultimately deliver. Where the magic is exactly here. It's about understanding your customer's expectations, your customer's needs, and delivering or over-delivering to these needs. The experience is never disconnected from the initial expectation. You have made a promise and you need to deliver.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the numbers. Barbara, as when Brian introduced Barbara, mentioned that Barbara heads up the CX Plus program around the world. And the CX Plus program is really about measuring that gap between the brand promise and the customer expectation. We haven't done a CX Plus in South Africa yet. I'm hoping that next year we will do one. But what we did this year is just a little study on a mobile study amongst the banking population, because a lot of the CX Plus markets are focused on banking, to measure what are some of the key trends that we see globally and how relevant it is to South Africa. So I know very often we see, hey, there's all these reports from things happening overseas, but that doesn't really apply to us. So how much of this applies to us? We've got a few numbers that we can compare, so I'm going to be focusing on that. And one of the key things that came out was that in South Africa, we see around 74% of South Africans say that they prefer to spend money on experiences rather than material possessions. And that's very similar to that millennials number that Barbara mentioned. And I think this is for a number of reasons. People in South Africa, when we talk about experiences, they looking at things that can enhance their lifestyles, they're looking at things that can enhance what they do with their time. And sometimes those product purchases are really about fitting in with the experience that I'm having. So if I've got a child, I might want a camera to take pictures of the child and remember those experiences. If I'm a sporting enthusiast, I might want to get a GoPro to film and create those memories and be able to broadcast and share those kind of experiences. But we generally see people are much more into experiences. And I'll talk a little bit about Daniel Kahneman later in my talk, but just to mention here that Daniel Kahneman talks about happiness and well-being in people's lives. And the fact that, well, we all know really, acquiring things doesn't really make you happier. But experience is important in terms of creating memories, which create the stories that we tell ourselves about our lives and the narrative of our lives. And why people are becoming more interested in experiences is that it's really about what are those memorable things that I take forward with me and make me feel good either about myself or that I've got a good story to tell about my life, whether it's on social media or just to myself. So I think it's a key component of where we are as a society. If we have a look at this around the world, we're actually quite high up there. Only India beats us slightly ahead in terms of people's interest in experiences. And we also don't see a huge gap between the millennials and the rest of the population here. In some of the more developed markets, there seems to be a bit of a gap between how millennials feel versus the older population or the general population. But here we're pretty much all in the same boat. And so how do companies leverage this experience? I think around the world, most companies are recognizing we've got to focus on experience, we've got to focus on being more customer-centric. And a study done by our sister company, Kantar Consulting, found that around the world, 91% of CEOs have got this very high up on the agenda. They see it as very essential to driving business growth. But when we look at how people feel, there's a bit of a disconnect. So in South Africa, we're seeing 31% are rating their experiences as truly customer-centric. And that's not to say we're doing a bad job. It's just how high is the bar really? We're not necessarily delivering against what people would really expect. The good news is, though, that we're not doing a bad job. If we compare ourselves to some of the countries around the world, only the US is ahead of us, and they obviously have a very strong culture of customer centricity and client service. But we were ahead of a lot of the other more developed markets like the UK, Italy, and France, and I'm glad I don't live in Poland. Next one. So just looking at those results in a bit more detail, we also asked people about their experiences with different companies in different industries, and we've got sort of a little bit of a ranking here in terms of how they stand. So banks really stand out in terms of delivering and overall, or being more customer-centric than a lot of the other industries. It's not a comprehensive list. As I mentioned, we did a mobile study, so it was really about getting a mix of what are some of the key industries that are delivering customer experience. With 3 municipalities there, I guess it's a little bit of an outlier because it's not a commercial business. But it's important for municipalities to also be customer-centric. So we see the banks, the technology company, the supermarkets seem to be more customer-centric, the telecommunications providers, insurance companies, and municipalities less so. If we look at digital experience, things switch around a bit. So we then see the technology companies and the social networks moving ahead. I think everybody can feel that they're having a good digital experience on these platforms. But banks also still doing pretty well there, I think, in terms of the new apps and the ways that you can engage with your bank digitally nowadays. A lot of progress has been made and seems to be there. Telecommunications provides a little bit further behind. But the insurance companies, again, fast food and supermarkets don't seem to be quite as strong. And then in terms of problem resolution, again, banks being seen to be good at resolving problems together with technology companies. And here again, the insurance companies and supermarkets were at the bottom of that list, with municipalities obviously a lot weaker there as well. And we also asked people, how do you feel about the last interaction you had with a tech company or a social media company or banks or fast foods? And this was about how they felt emotionally. So were you delighted or were you disappointed or irritated? It's the green dot is the delight, the red is disappointed. And we just look at the gap between people rating those. Tech companies, social media, and banks, sort of similar pattern coming through there in terms of delighting their customers more. Telecoms, the gap gets quite narrow. Insurance is very narrow in terms of that. And then in the municipalities, we're actually seeing a negative score there. So a lot more people irritated than there are delighted. And then one of the things we also found was quite a big gap between how women feel about businesses' customer centricity. Right across the board, across all the industries, a gap between men and women. And when we look at the data, we see that a lot of the ratings are quite similar for men and women, but it's not playing out in terms of customer centricity. So it must be that businesses are just not really understanding women and the way that their expectations are in terms of maybe their worldview, how they see things, and how are they meeting those needs at the right level. I'm going to hand over to Barbara to talk a little bit more about that.
I feel very strongly about this point when we talk about stereotypes and women in customer experience. There's a genetic fact that our brains, man and women brains, are 92% equal, similar. We have the same brain. The difference is about 8%. So what is different between me and Mark, beyond that, I have hair. Sorry, that wasn't planned. Is that we are different in terms of how we make decisions, how we perceive brands and how we make decisions. Here are some examples. Female are drawn towards their peers in terms of decision making. They listen to their peers, they listen to word of mouth, they want recommendation from consumers who are like them, like-minded people. And they like those. Whereas men tend to like the more logical, rational expertise from higher above. That's, generalizing, but there's something true in here. And actually, if we think about women And here you see women are disengaged and underserved in their experience with financial services, but actually we talk about financial services as a case study, as an example, but it's true for automotive, technology, insurance, probably telecoms to some extent. Think about yourself and think about your life. And this is actually a massive amount of money that has been, again, left on the table if we don't manage to connect with women, because the biggest market in the world isn't China. It's women. Over 170 million women run a business nowadays in the world. 40%, about 40% of the global health is in the hands of women. 80% of the purchase decisions are made by women. If we don't connect in the right way, we are really losing massive opportunities. These are some examples that we've seen recently. Chase is a bank from the US. Most of you may know, and that had a massive backlash. They had to actually take it down. And there is something about how some, industries still connect with women. There is this slightly patronizing undertone in the communication where you actually think, you're trying to patronize me? And these size bits of nuggets that relates to women's frivolous expenses of, make your own coffee, don't go to Starbucks, or don't take the cab, walk 3 blocks. Things where you think, is that what this is all about? There are some examples, and actually the communication, the kind of experience we give is this very often. And we've seen across the world, there's the easy solution, which is, we're going to have a lot of pink decoration. And there's the authentic solution. And I want to show 2 from across the world. One from India. India is a very, very advanced market in terms of financial services. A lot of the banks are in the top 10 in the brand Z ranking in terms of brand value. And that's Yes Bank. Yes Bank is a bank that has managed to really connect with female consumers in a very different way. They have made a pledge to support women entrepreneurship in India. They have programs for inclusion of women in the workplace and in social life. And you may know that doing this in India is not easy. And then there's another example. That's from the US, Key Bank. That's a very brave campaign they've driven, Key Bank, with a hashtag, Real Life Bosses, and taking a stance for women leadership and breaking the glass ceiling. And that's a brave decision when you're going to be a gender balanced brand. You have a lot of people that you could be irritating with such a campaign. So it's a very authentic and very brave thing to do, and they've been very successful with that.
Right, so we're going to switch over a little bit to technology and how technology is driving things. And we focused a little bit on the banking side of things, but the banks are going through a lot of disruption right now, which I think is a lead into what a lot of other industries are either already experiencing or going to experience. So hopefully a lot of these learnings will still be applicable to people that are in other industries. So we asked people in South Africa how they feel about AI being used more generally in society, and the news is that people are mostly enthusiastic. Around 43% of people saying, this is something great, it's going to make our lives better. But we do also see around a quarter of people saying, I'm not so sure, I'm anxious, this is scary stuff. I'm not so sure whether it's a good thing or not. So you've got a little bit of a polar views in terms of AI, and I think it's just important to understand who your target market is, who your customer is, in terms of how you engage with this. We also see that there are some skews in terms of age, so younger people are much more open to the idea of using AI to help me out and helping with my experience and the services that I'm trying to access, and older people a little bit more hesitant and reticent. We also see quite a big gap between males and females on the use of AI, and I'm not sure what the reason is for that, but it's something just to note. In terms of using data information around who you are and all your details to be able to provide more personalized services, people are quite enthusiastic in South Africa. So quite a willingness to say, use my data to make my experience better. And we're ahead of the other countries where we've measured this. So relatively similar scores across the European countries, India, and so forth. But we're quite a bit more positive. And the kinds of things that people are looking for in terms of personalized services, some of them are fairly straightforward. It's about alert me if there's something funny going on my account. Offer a fingerprint or facial recognition when I want to access my facilities and things that I don't have to type in that stupid PIN code the whole time. And analyze my spending habits to help me save money. When we look at those that are more pro or anti the use of my data, we see the relevant banking services based on my spending habits. So I understand what I'm doing with my money and help me in terms of that. Look at my shopping behavior and help me earn loyalty points for things that I really like. Understand my life stage and offer me appropriate support and services. So I think this is quite key as we go through different stages of our career, having families and so forth. Be proactive about when I need to maybe get a car loan or a home loan, or I've got kids that I need to start thinking about. Setting pre-approved offers that I might qualify for, so looking at my financial situation, alerting me that I might qualify, and using GPS information to show me where I might get discounts for things that are relevant to me that might be close to me, so slightly lower debt. And in terms of the new kind of technology-enabled banks, a lot of the new purely digital banks, how do people feel about that? Again, in South Africa, slightly more positive. You see India very similar, and then some of the more developed European countries, slightly lower enthusiasm for those. And what we do see is that there's a strong socioeconomic correlation with that. So people earning lower incomes generally much more open to engaging with digital banks, the new banks. I think because of lower costs, easier to use, and the way that they might be using their money. People higher up the income scale, maybe more sophisticated needs, a lot more services and so forth, and still prefer maybe using the traditional type banking. Again, some differences in age, but not huge differences in terms of the age profile. So, are we moving from bricks to clicks?
And you're hearing a lot about financial services and banking today. Banking, we start with CX Plus to analyze and rank banks because it's a sector that is actually an incredible case study in terms of how you can use customer experience to connect in a different way and grow your market share and your customer base. It's a sector that is living through an amazing disruption. A lot of new technology coming in, a lot of new players coming from outside of financial services, new legislations. So it's really a very interesting sector. So are we going from bricks to clicks? When we think about neobank, and that's a term that has been coined, neobank is nothing else than a digital bank or a bank that is mainly active and servicing through digital channels. Actually, the impact is still very little. So there's, again, the big hype But in terms of, real customer banking with a neobank, China, India, and to a certain extent Brazil have a bit of a customer base. The rest of the world is still very limited. Okay? A thing that we need to take into consideration, but there are very important things that we can learn from these neobanks, from these new disruptors in this industry, and that actually apply to most of the other industries. One, those disruptors are able to scale really fast, and that's part of their strategy. They can't sustain large marketing campaigns. They don't have the financial support to do that. And they work on very, very narrow margins. So that means they need to acquire a vast customer base very, very fast. So these are 3 examples from around the world. You see Europe, UK, there's a new bank from LATAM. Amazing results, amazing customer acquisition in very, very little times. They've not been on the market more than, Revolut is probably the oldest one, but we're talking definitely few years. And the second thing is they are really changing the way clients interact with their financials. And we're showing an example from South Africa, but we've got a lot of examples from around the world. They are really shifting behaviors. And that's one of the things that makes them so successful. Because the people are starting to want to change the way they interact with their money. And that's a very, very important mindset change. We'll see that in the following more in details.
Yeah, so we looked, I think if you've been following the news recently, at a lot of bank branch closures around South Africa, potential protests and the staff at those banks not liking the idea that they're going to be losing their jobs. So it's in the news, people are aware of it. So you ask people how they feel about digital banking or telephone banking versus visiting a branch. And overall, people are really positive towards it. So with 30% saying that they much prefer it, that means the other 43% are kind of veering towards preferring the traditional bank. So I think it's about understanding that balance. Younger people definitely much more open to the idea of digital banking versus older people sort of on the line between digital versus traditional. But we are seeing huge movements of people onto digital banking, and that's one of the factors that's obviously driving these branch closures. Is from a commercial point of view, if you've got nobody going into them, it becomes hard to sustain that infrastructure. So what we're seeing is that globally, technology is changing the banking landscape. In South Africa, we see around 700 branches having shut in the last few years, since the last 10 years, since its peak in terms of the number of branches in South Africa. And in other countries around the world, the same pattern is playing out. So in the UK, in the last 5 years, a third of their branches have closed. In the last 20 years, 2/3 of those branches have closed. In the US as well, we're seeing a similar pattern. In the last 5 years, almost 10,000 branches closing, and that rate of change is ongoing. It's the same number every year that are closing. So there's a different big move away from having this physical infrastructure where you can go into the branch. But that has consequences, and you need to be aware of those. So the key one is lack of choice. If you've got no branches in your town, where do you go to do your banking? If there's one branch left, maybe you'll switch to that bank. It's inconvenient if you do go to the branch, because now everybody has to go to the same branch and it becomes more crowded. You've got to travel further, maybe sometimes hundreds of kilometers if you need to go into a branch. And one of the big impacts we're seeing is that branch closures affect small businesses. They need access to cash, they need access to be able to go and speak to their branch manager, speak to somebody and help with their cash flow and financial issues. And those closures are severely affecting small businesses. We'll talk a little bit more about the relationship side of things in a moment as well, but that is also a key one. If you don't have a physical presence where you can go and talk to someone at the branch, you're severing relationships. In many instances, maybe those relationships have been going on for many years, now they're gone. And you're losing that face-to-face communication where you can actually go and sit down and look somebody in the eye and have that discussion. So in the UK, there was a study done report was out on the actual impact of these branch closures, and it goes beyond just the inconvenience factors. What happens now is if you want to do your banking, you'll go through to the next town, and while you're there, you'll do all your shopping and everything else. So it's impacting the high street. The other businesses within those towns are seeing a loss of business as fewer people actually go and do their shopping there. And that's actually having a major impact on small towns around the UK, and I'm sure the same pattern will play out in other places. And this is just a status of where we are now. So this is with all the branch closures. We sort of, depending on how you look at it, whether you only look at the sort of officially bank people in South Africa, we're sitting at about 300, which is similar to what the US is. If you look at the entire population, there's only about 100 branches per million people for South Africans. So somewhere on those two scales, but clearly not a huge number of branches. So what we see as the biggest risk for these bank branch closures is the loss of an empathetic connection with customers. And from a customer experience point of view, that's really important. So how frequently do customers interact with people at banks when they can do everything via the app or digital channels? If everything is really easy for me to do, and I've taken all the pain out of it and it's all the convenience, that's wonderful in terms of that experience of getting my stuff done. But I now no longer have a physical interaction with the person at the bank. So if everybody starts offering the same features and the same types of service on their apps and digital channels, how do I tell whether one bank's better than the other? What's the relationship or the emotional connection that I have with that bank, which means next time I need a financial thing that I'll just switch out to whatever is the cheapest, the most convenient. So I lose that commitment, I lose that connection to the bank. And what makes it memorable? I'll talk a little bit more to that now, but these experiences are not memorable anymore. They're just really easy. So there's nothing that's embedding any memories about the bank in your mind from a brand point of view. And the question we need to ask is, how do banks create an emotional connection with their customers in this kind of environment? So I'll just talk quickly about why this mattered, and we'll go back to Daniel Kahneman. So for those of you not familiar with Daniel Kahneman, he was the 2002 Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he's got a TED talk that talks about happiness, it talks about memories, which is really worth watching. I recommend that you have a look at that on YouTube. But he talks about the difference between the experiencing self and the remembering self. And that experiences, we experience literally thousands of things every day. Most of these experiences are not memorable. The experiences that are memorable go into our long-term memory and generally have some sort of emotional connection. It can be something that's caused by a change. It can be something that's caused by a moment that creates a very negative or positive emotional response in us, and it can be caused by some sort of an ending and how that ended and what that creates that memory. So these things are important in terms of, from a brand point of view, in terms of getting into that memory and getting into the kind of narrative that people have about their relationship with the brand. So what we see is that emotion is really at the heart of memories and memorable experiences, and embedding a brand and the relationship that you have with the brand in people's minds and in their beliefs. We need to create positive emotions in the moments that matter. So, dealing on your app, interacting with the bank, that's not a massive moment to create a memory on that. You just want to get things done. But you do want to anticipate within a customer's journey when they have a task to fulfill, is there an opportunity to create a memorable moment? Is there an opportunity to create something that delights them, that makes them think, wow, that was an amazing experience, I want to remember that. And it's got to be around something that matters. Those experiences then become memories, and our memories is what drives our relationships. And you'll see that those relationships really drive business outcomes as well. So in a Harvard Business Review article in the New Science of Customer Emotions, they did a number of studies looking at people that had rated an experience as excellent. So they were highly satisfied with the experience that they had. And they asked a second question about how that are emotionally connected at work in that experience. Those people that were highly satisfied but not fully connected, that we treat as the baseline, those that were highly satisfied and fully connected at an emotional level in terms of that experience, had a 52% uplift in terms of retention, profitability, repurchase, whatever metric you looked at, it was around about that 52% increase. So having that emotional connection really has a positive ROI in terms of people's behavior. And we see this in our own research as well. If we look at people that say they had rated the experience as excellent, and we ask them how they actually felt with the interaction, people that say they were satisfied generally give us a very sort of functional answer. You know, I got what I wanted, the issue was resolved, good customer service, job was done, fine. There's no emotional connection, nothing to carry forward into your brand relationship. If we look at people rated the same, but just move to delighted, we start seeing the human element coming through. People talk about how the person they dealt with made them feel, how they helped solve problems, how they understood what the issue was and helped them. And that's really the key here, is just how do we create that empathetic human connection in terms of driving relationships.
So, you know, we were talking about emotions, and I think there's a very important point around many industries not being able to connect with the human being on that emotional level, and especially when we talk about, you know, tech and telecom, but also financial services. It's a very rational matter. It has been, always been. And that's actually not true. When we think about financial services, when we think about, you know, giving the results of our whole life, the future of our kids, you know, the results of a lifetime of working, sweat, blood and tears in somebody's hand, that's actually very emotional. And treating that on a very rational base is something that will create a disconnect with people. So I want to show you an example from Nationwide. It's a UK financial services company which always ranks extremely high in terms of customer experience in the UK. It's very well known as one of the best customer experience company in the UK. They have created a campaign which never talks about money. It talks about the human being and putting the human being and its emotion and the life and the experience and the memories at the center. And I want to show you this video, and then we can talk about the connections between technology, emotion, and how you put the human being at the center.
We are the most lonely society in history. Immediately Ascot looked at my 4-inch movie screen for, if I picked you up right now, I could talk to a face that it would take me years to walk to. I thought, with a few taps on this LCD screen, I could have a car outside ready to drive me anywhere. How can you be lonely when everything can be done with a tap or a swipe? I guess just because you can, it doesn't mean you do. Often, the more you can, the less you're inclined to do. It's a funny kind of race. Have you ever been meaning to call somebody but never actually do? Imagine there were no phones, no Facebook, no such thing as online. You'd probably find the time to meet up for a cuppa and a schmooze. Strange that. I like my internet connectivity, but it shouldn't block my interconnectivity, so I try and combine the two. I'll send a message via WhatsApp, tell a friend, put the kettle on bruv, I'm coming round to see ya for a knees up and a brew.
So I love these examples. I love this example. And I think, to me, the message that I take from it is, forget about technology. Take a white paper and think about what is the experience that you want your customer to have with you. Forget about technology. Forget about how you're going to get there. At the end of the day, it's just a support mechanism. And this is where often we get it wrong. we confuse the experience with the technology, and it has nothing to do with one another.
Yeah, so in South Africa, what we're seeing is, while the mainstream banks are closing their branches, Capitec is busy rolling out their branches. And they're now sitting at 840, which is the largest number of bank branches in South Africa. And this despite the fact that 85% of their transactions have actually moved to self-help. And the key here is really that an understanding that very often customers need to come in and have a face-to-face discussion. They need to have that connection and have somebody explain things to them that can't be done on an app or bot or whatever other mechanism that you're using. And I think it's not necessarily just about branches. So I'm not saying to banks, you must stop closing the branches. There's obviously a commercial imperative behind that. The important thing is, how do you maintain human connection? What other things can you put in place to maintain that need that people still have to connect on a face-to-face basis?
Yeah, so we were saying from bricks to clicks. So is bricks the problem and click the solution? There are some financial services companies who are going against the stream and are actually building branches. Capital One is one of these examples in the US, where they have started to create new branches called the Capital One Cafes. And basically, it's a branded Starbucks cafe. You can go in, even as a non-customer, you can be customer or non-customer, it's free. You can go in, you can have a cafe, you can have a cup, you can have a tea, there's Wi-Fi, there are tablets. You have a couple of bank employees, bank manager, sitting around in a very informal environment. You can have a financial discussion about your money, or you can simply have a cup of coffee and chill. And that's a very different environment and a very different way to connect with your bank. And I think that's actually a fabulous example that illustrates how it's not about the branch, it's not about the physical location. It's about the context that you set to create that relationship. So, humanizing the experience, yeah? So we're talking about technology. Within the technological era that we live in, how do you humanize this experience? How do you make the technology the slave of the human being rather than the other way around? And that's expressing it a bit big, but okay. I've just thought it out right now. Mark.
Yeah. So in South Africa, again, people want banks to go beyond just offering products and services and really help them with their life journey. As Barbara mentioned earlier, finance and money is a highly emotive thing. It affects every single stage of our lives, and people want banks to help them with that. You see in South Africa, 68% of people, again, much higher numbers than elsewhere around the world, in terms of banks providing product, going beyond providing products by giving advice and support when they need it.
So we must find the balance between digital seamlessness and humanity. We must understand that technology is not there to save costs or to replace the experience. Technology is a support mechanism to create that emotional connection with the human being. It's there to amplify the relationship that you can have with the human being. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the term smaller worlds. Smaller worlds is what defines the ability that we now have as human beings, because of technology, because of the digital world, to connect to other human beings we would never have found in any other way. That's what Nationwide was saying, is our ability to create our own tribe through this digital connection, okay? So find the people with whom I share interest or belief, whether that's Instagram or Pinterest or Facebook or whatever. So this is incredibly important to people nowadays, to bridge that loneliness that this guy Nationwide campaign was talking about. And 84% of people, for 84% of people, it's extremely important to make an effort to buy from companies who really connect with the causes and the causes they support and the beliefs that they have. which is again talking about, as a brand and as a company taking a stance. So I want to show you an example of a brand, bank brand in the Netherlands, and it's Knab. So I've done that yesterday in Joburg, and anyone knows what Knab means? I mean, it's a Dutch word. It's bank spread backwards. I had like 30 seconds. Do I think it's funny or and it's simply they're putting banking on their heads. That's their thing. That's their tagline. We are turning the banking world the other way around. So this is an example. I'm not going to read it. This is an example of a call interview we had with a customer who said, "I was blown away. I opened the app. I opened the chat." Functioning the app, and within 30 seconds there was somebody on the line, I think it was somebody, I'm not sure, was able to cancel my account for me. And one thing that Knab does very successfully, and that's in the Netherlands extremely important, because there are a critical mass of people who want companies to take a stance for social or environmental causes. Knab encourages customers to invest part of their saving for charities and fundraising. Another one is a bank in Finland who enables its customer through the credit card to track their carbon footprint. So, talking about smaller worlds and talking about our ability to create that connection through technology, that's another fabulous example. This is the Nike store. It's not even a store, it's something completely different. It's the Nike House of Innovation in New York. And it's a store that allows the human being, the customer, to create its own experience. It's a store that restocks its shelves based on what the community tells it wants to see. It's able to completely change the layout, the tiles, the floors, the section based on what people feedback they want to see as an experience. So you as a human being in the Nike House of Innovation, you are able to create your own completely personalized customable experience, which is an amazing example of how technology can be at the service of the human being. So this was it from us, and I think that in the following you get a bit more inspiration. We think we've given you some inspiration on the way on how you can get the experience advantage for your brand. Okay.